Mr. Speaker, religion is generally a pretty good thing. It allows human beings to deal with a pretty miserable condition that we seem to be born in, deal with like natural existential dread that comes about when you have to deal with a life that seems to require axioms but doesn't seem to allow you to get them from anywhere. I'm not a believer, but I'm actually very jealous of people who are believers. On the other hand, I'm not jealous of the fact that they are born into power structures that oppress them, that indoctrinate them, and that cause massive harms to human civilizations the world over and throughout history. So we're very proud to propose a pretty simple idea. So what we're going to say is that a world with religion, but no organized religion would be a better one. So what do I mean by that? So a couple things. So we still think there would probably still be religious texts that like more than one person would agree about. We still think people will talk about religion. We still think parents will probably even indoctrinate their children, things like that, right? But we're not going to have any formal authority. We're not going to have any formal structure that lays out what dogma is. We're not going to have any formal authority that determines what the correct interpretation of this scripture is. We assume people will try. What we're going to say is we think it would be a much better world if people were very, very naturally resistant to any belief in this system. If there are any questions about it, I'd be happy. I think it should be first. Clarification?
Yeah, could you set up some form of hierarchical Bible study group if you wanted to?
Nope. Nope, that would be organized religion, right? Like you get together and say like this person is in charge of this discussion and has more interpretative authority than anyone else. We'll call that organized. All right, so 3 arguments I'm going to bring you. The first is about the direct harms caused by organized religions. The second is about how it interferes with the formation of opinion and why I think that's particularly important. And the third is about the indirect harms to human progress caused by religion. So first, under direct harms, I think pretty straightforwardly, Mr. Speaker, it's the case that religion has caused a lot of fucked up shit, right? Like the Crusades, terrorist attacks on New York City, the Inquisition, wars the world over, discrimination against blacks, whites, gays, and especially people from other religious groups. We think that this is a natural occurrence in any religious context for a couple of reasons. So I think the basic reason, the reason why generally you have some sort of discrimination in a religious context that leads to the sorts of conflicts we're talking about here, the sorts of attacks and human rights violations we're talking about here, is that you need to have an in-group, out-group mentality when you set up a religion for it to be particularly meaningful. Because the whole idea of a religion is you go to a group of people and say, if you believe the following things, if you accept the following dogmas, if you accept the following person as your savior, or the following text as your holy text, then you will receive these special benefits at the end of your life or in your life or something like that. Like, in order for there to be a good offer on the table, there needs to be some sort of exclusion of other people. And also, you need to be mutually exclusive with other codes of belief. Because if you say, well, you can believe Islam or you can believe Judaism, you'll end up with the same result in the end. Then you don't actually have a very compelling reason to believe that the religion that you're advocating for. So I think that's the basic reason why you end up with different groups. But I think then what happens is that in the case of organized religion, there are a couple things that compound this harm. So first, if you're an organized religion and you're interested in preserving your power, and just because of the nature of the sorts of claims religions make, you tend to make claims about absolute truth. You tend to say, this is God, this is how we should understand God, and there cannot be any contesting this. And second, you tend to do things like say, there can't be any rational resistance to this either. Like the sorts of claims you're making are generally axiomatic. So what happens is you have these beliefs that are extremely hard to resist, and then they co-opt existing power structures, Mr. Speaker. We think this is why it's not sufficient to say, like an outline that we're kind of expecting, because we've probably all seen the world semifinal where this round happened. It's not sufficient to say other ideologies will replace this, right? Because what we have is an ideology that compounds itself with other ideologies, and that is much harder to resist than other ideologies, because you cannot resist it with rational argument. So insofar as that's the case, we say it would be better to get rid of organized religion, because a lot of the harms we're talking about are compounded by the fact that you have an agent or a group of agents who are able to keep their power and keep their control over a group of people by propagating these beliefs further. We think that being in a position of religious authority, no thank you, is generally something that's beneficial to you, and generally something that you want to hold on to. So we think that by doing away with organized religion, we dramatically decrease the likelihood of the long list of fucked up things that I gave you at the circus point. The second thing I want to talk about is the formation of opinion. So I think that...
Before that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, given that rationality is defined mostly by circumstance and your surroundings, how would you give like a broad-based, universal, acceptable definition of rationality?
That was a very confusing POI. I don't think rationality is determined entirely by your circumstances, and I don't see why I have to engage in some sort of epistemological exercise to make the points that I'm trying to make in this solution. My second point is about the formation of opinion. So I think that in general, your opinions do more to determine who you are as a person and what you do as a person than anything else. Like, to take two examples, Martin Luther King and Martin Luther both led lives that were very different than the lives that they would have led had they not held extremely devout religious beliefs, one against the doctrines of the Catholic Church and the other against the use of violence. Insofar as that's the case, and insofar as projects compose, like your life projects, compose a large degree of your personal identity, I think that it's on balance better that people have agency in determining what those projects are. And insofar as those projects are generally determined by beliefs, we think you definitely should vote for the government in this round. Because I think what happens when you have a system of organized religion is that it's much more likely that people will be aggressively indoctrinated for two reasons. First, there's a much bigger enforcement mechanism, right? Like, if you know that the Inquisition will come after you if you teach your children heretical doctrines, or if you spread heretical doctrines around you, it's much less likely that you will do that. And second, recognize that organized religion tends to reinforce dogma. Because there are people who have power, whose power is contingent on the dogma that they have long advocated for remaining the dogma. Schism reduces their power over the group that they're trying to control. So insofar as that's the case, we think that on our side of the house, we will still have some indoctrination, but we will have much less. And insofar as indoctrination prevents people from actualizing their own identity and determining the shape of their own lives, we think that's a good thing. But the final thing I want to talk about is negative social externalities. Because I also think religion is just really horrible for general human progress, even when it doesn't actively try to be. So the first area where I think this is true is science. I think that science is generally trying to make some sorts of claims about truth in the universe. And religion is also trying to make some sorts of claims about truth in the universe. And religions generally want to say that they have access to the main truths of the universe. They can provide them to you, and they're written down right here in this convenient book that we have available for 50 cents. Now, insofar as that's true, what we've actually seen religions do is they generally oppress people like Galileo. They oppress people like Maimonides, who do things that challenge their control of information and of truth about the universe. We think this generally sets human civilization back and prevents human civilization from advancing as quickly as it could, with all the commensurate benefits in terms of quality of life, technology, medical care, and things like that. But also I think there's a problem in terms of politics, Mr. Speaker. We think that religion, organized religion in particular, is inherently authoritarian, and it makes people more likely to be willing to live under authoritarian regimes that can claim to be absolute truth. We think democracy is a better system than authoritarianism. For that reason, and the other reasons that I have, we would like to get back to these. We propose.
Okay, I think the speaker for his speech should now open the case for Team 12 that the House recognises Sarah.
Mr. Speaker, by doing away with the organizational aspects of religion, we get rid of the community-based structures, the networks of support, the networks of relief that can be provided to individuals during these times. But moreover, I'd like to point out that, especially when we talk about nations that have multiple religions, we remove one of the only other organizational identities that people could buy into as apart from state nationalism or state identity. And I'm going to talk about why having minority identities within a state is actually much better for overall peace and individual worth. So first of all, I want to talk about why it provides benefits through the formation of communities around religion. Why? First of all, because I think that having an organizational structure where you do have a person who perhaps runs meetings locally, whether those are church meetings, whether those are meetings at mosques, etc., having someone who preaches from a pulpit, having someone who runs Sunday school, etc., provides a network for people that allows other people to have an extension of people who care about them. Why is that important? Well, first of all, because basically beyond the family unit in a lot of different structures, you don't necessarily get an inherent sense of support. That is, often in like poor economic communities, people rely on other families to take care of their children after school, will rely on someone to be able to take care of their children at summer camp or things like that. Organized religion provides a network through which people can identify by a particular system of beliefs that induces them to create care for each other and identify along the same broad-based beliefs, which means that they're more likely to treat other people well. So for example, by going to a church every Sunday, families connect with each other, they form these connections that then allows them to move through life with as little pain as possible and with probably as many more people that they can trust to help them out. But secondly, even if we have perhaps one person who does preach a certain set of organized principles, what this does mean is that you have more discussion around the principles that are actually being adopted by people. So it is not the case that Sam says, well, one person gets total authoritarian rule. But often what happens in organized religions is you will have conversations between churches, or especially things like Bible study, etc., where people become more involved with interpretations of the text. This is actually better because what it means is that you expand the discussion for what a good moral value is and what a good life looks like and how people should treat others, as opposed to parents just taking their children and saying, these are the set of beliefs our family abides by, and indoctrinating their children on a more individual level that removes a more democratic check for exactly what kind of principles they're going to abide by. We think you actually get better, more good principles being acted between people when you have more people being acted as checks, when you have more discussions from people who have come from different lived experiences, different socioeconomic backgrounds, uniting under the infrastructure of a religion to discuss those principles. But thirdly, I think you get a creation, that you get a guide for some kind of principle to live your life by that you might want in absence of having no guide. So for example, when Sam begins his speech and says, look, we understand that religion gives a lot of relief during trying times, that when your life places stress or danger upon you, it is nice to be able to turn to some level of faith that is given to you. I don't think that faith can be as strong without some sort of person who is espousing that principle. In particular, what would the Bible look like if without the figure of Jesus Christ providing some level of mantra towards that individual, providing them some level of guidance during those times, or principles of what they can do. Even things like penance and things like that are often guidances that are given down by the text or by that hierarchical structure to make people feel better about themselves and feel less guilty. All of those benefits to the individual in times of grief cannot come without the infrastructure to be able to perform that. Having a priest to give confessional to, etc., provides immense relief. It can't happen otherwise. I think the product of this on a national and community basis is twofold. First of all, that you then get networks that help people either adjust, whether that is through immigration, etc., which can be very stressful and trying, but it also gives social networks for people. I also think that it makes people more motivated towards other people in their community. Just having an identity beyond your national identity as one that you can connect other people to means that you're more likely to help those people out just as a daily general thing to do for other people, meaning that you get more support. Yeah.
It may be the case that Canadian church groups in the modern day allow everyone to challenge doctrine to some degree, but that hasn't been the case for most religions for most of human history. I think you need to talk about the major case here, not what's going on right now.
Sure, but the binary is that you would have this happen on a more household level without an infrastructure for discussion. For example, you don't need to be religious to be extremely sexist or to be extremely racist. At the very least, this provides an identity that you can have more of a check on. So for example, lots of different races subscribe to Christianity, and a lot of white people are also Muslim. What this means is that you get more of a check absent a very small nucleus in which you might be raised with these beliefs. That's the comparative. I also think that, so I want to move on to refutation. Sam says, look, you need exclusion when you create an organizational identity. This is just true because there will always be another. But I think the alternative is that everyone else is the other. And at least if you create a community, then you have other people you're identifying with so that you can bestow upon them those benefits. But moreover, you're far more likely to be expansive and diverse with who you decide to bestow upon good actions with, because often it is the case that organizational religions will try and bestow upon good tenets like help other people, help your neighbor, etc. These are all things that can be expanded far beyond the people that subscribe to your religion, that most people do act on that basis. He then says, look, they create claims to absolute truth that are very hard to resist. But I'm also uncertain why people might create these claims on their own or feel them as strongly without the support of a community that also says, yes, these are right, or no, I don't believe necessarily this way, I interpreted this text differently. The way in which Sam interprets this is like, well, because you have one leader who is imparting a particular interpretation to you, you can't resist it. But instead, it's usually the case that the leader will create his own interpretation or her own interpretation of the text. but within the forum in which you would engage with other people, or in which other people would also identify on those bases. So I don't think that the claim to absolute truth will either happen in absence of it, or that you will believe it as strongly. We think it's probably pretty good when people have similar level in their faith. He says, look, there will be much less indoctrination, but regardless, parents will indoctrinate their children into a particular set of beliefs. At least this gets more of a check. He then says you're more likely to buy into an authoritarian system, but actually religion gives a check against the government in the case that there are often different minorities encompassed within the state, so they have different levels of belief for different people.
Okay, and the speaker for House speech, and that's continue the case, Team 6, the House recognises Mike.
Mr. Speaker, I think opening opposition failed to engage in a debate that was actually ground in the world we operate in. What they showed you at best in this round is that in theory, organized religions sound like something that could work. The problem is they didn't show in practice that they work. Because at the end of the day, we provide you explanations as to why religion uniquely causes these problems, but at the end of the day, these problems were caused and they did exist. That said, I want to organize the speech in the following way. I'll talk about it on two levels. On the micro level, in terms of how religion affects people on a smaller level in communities, their ideologies, and on a macro level, in terms of how it shapes conflict, how it shapes societal progress, and I think there'll be a kind of natural dichotomy here. So, Sarah begins her speech, and she says, in rebuttal to Roman, she says, look, people need an organized identity to buy into it. A lot of the arguments about the micro impacts buy into the idea that organized religion provides an identity. The question is not in this round whether or not people should have an identity. The question is, what should be the source of that identity? Because what we tell you on opening government is that identities that are crafted based on your own consideration of these issues, that thoughtfully thinking about things that are not ingrained, that is actually going to lead to better outcomes in terms of the identities created. Because here's the problem for them. There's two kind of problems. The first is, on a more fundamental and pernicious level, at the very least they deal what we think is coercive forces that, because of the lottery of birth, often places individuals into particular religious identities. The religion you are, someone born in the United States in New York, who's like me, is very unlikely to ever be a Muslim in my lifetime. That's not really a viable option that's ever presented to me. That's the first problem they face. But even at the very worst they face, even if you don't buy that, there are certainly default biases that are created very powerfully that make it difficult for people to actually access different identities. So on the micro level, what is their conception? They say, well look, religions provide a lot of good in terms of communities for people, resources for people, support for people, in terms of practically and being able to deal with trying times. Here's the problem, and here's what this debate is about. The question you need to ask yourself is, in a world in which, without organized religion, which is less likely to still exist? Is it less likely that family structures disappear, that community networks disappear, or is it more likely that things like conflict are actually reduced? Which of these exists more exogenously of religion to some extent is the question of this debate. And what we would tell you is, it is much more likely that things like family structures and community ties that are natural human impulses towards working together because it's advantageous for them to do so. Humanity worked together before religions ever existed. These things are still going to exist. The question and the problem for them though is the bad things go away. Sure, go.
Yeah, how are you more likely to allay the existential dread that Sam talks about at the point at which you are just reading the Bible alone in your basement?
Sure. So I think the idea of existential dread, I think the question you need to ask is, why do people actually turn towards religion in these circumstances? And the answer is, they need some way of rationalizing bad things that happen to them in their life. The question is just, why do they need an organized, structured, hierarchical way of rationalizing these things? Because people will always rationalize bad things that happen to them. They'll always have that capacity. Maybe at worst for us, it is marginally worse in terms of people's ability to deal with these types of things. But I think at the end of the day, the impact of that argument is much smaller than all the bad things that happen to people when they die because wars are caused by religion. That is a much more pernicious impact, even if you buy that this has any meaningful weight. The only other thing they really have here is this idea of the infrastructure for discussion. But there's a few problems with this argument. First of all, it's not a meaningful infrastructure for discussion at the point, but for the majority of human history, most people didn't have the ability to actually access these texts at all that you need to be involved in this conversation. The second problem with this argument, though, is it's not actually a meaningful infrastructure for discussion, because when you get together to talk about religion, you're not talking with people of different religions. You're talking with people who already have your ideology. Why is that so pernicious when you go to a Catholic church? It's pernicious because it just reinforces an echo chamber that makes it harder for you to ever shape that ideology in the first place, and it makes you more likely to buy into even the negative things associated with that religion when you have social pressure structured around these types of institutional gatherings and discussion. So it's not just enough for them to say, discussion is good. They have to show why the type of discussion they envision is what actually happens in the real world, and why even that type of discussion is a meaningful good or an impact that is tangible. That's the micro level. I don't think individuals' lives are made so much better off by organized structures that it somehow changes the way that communities operate. Those communities exist in either world. People can answer existential questions in either world. The question, though, and the second thing I want to talk about, is on a macro level, things like conflict. So the rebuttal we got to this idea from the opening up was completely inadequate. They basically say, well, look, absolutist truths can also exist in a world without organized religion. Here's the missing link that's critical they don't deal with. In a world without organized religion, maybe you or I comes up with an absolutist ideology that tells us that we need to kill people of different religions. But the problem is, one individual person coming up with that ideology doesn't translate into large-scale societal conflicts or wars. And what organized religion does is, it bridges the gap between ideology and action in a couple of ways. First, it provides a support network of other people who share the ideologies that allow you to do these things. Second, infrastructurally, it provides networks and it provides tangible resources that allow you to organize and perpetuate these harms. And third of all, it makes these harms more likely because in the types of discourse that takes place in religion, because they are inherently conservative institutions for all the reasons Sam gave you, the most radical conservative voices often win out in the discourse and mean that these pernicious ideologies are actually more likely to exist as a result of this belief in absolutist truths. Sure, I guess.
Okay, can you give me an example of a contemporary religious conflict and explain to me why it was exclusively motivated by religion rather than ethnic tensions or seeking money?
It is not our burden to show you that religion exclusively drives conflicts in the world. It is our burden to show you that it meaningfully contributes to them and makes them worse than they would be otherwise. So to answer your question, ideologies like radical Islam do make people more likely to be willing to do things like sacrifice themselves for a larger cause in the name of the jihad that causes conflict. And we don't have to just, and you guys want to have this debate in like 2012? Unfortunately, there have been 6,000 other years of human history when this wasn't the case in any tangible way. In the other 6,000 years we're dealing with in this debate, religions very frequently told you that others were non-believers. And this is because of the inherently in-group, out-group dynamic. When a religion says that other people are heathens who are sinners and that you need to act in a particular way to deal with that, that inherently does produce more conflict. Like, look, things like ethnicity will still exist. They will still drive conflicts. That's the operating reality of the debate. Wars will still exist on both sides of the house. The question, though, is, do they make them better? But the other thing that's important to recognize is the degree to which religions pose a conservative force. Because they say religions are good because they provide a check against the state. But the problem is, religion is often the most useful tool the state has at its disposal to co-opt the population and take advantage of them. Why? Because people can't question religious truths. So by assigning political ideologies and aligning them with religious ideologies, it makes it incredibly easy to coerce people because it makes them unwilling to challenge that infrastructure of the state. And then the state you're looking at is states that are theocratic, things like the Anglican churches intertwined with England, things like Islam in the Middle East. What you see is societies that are not only more oppressive towards minority groups, and especially towards women, because these institutions tend to be inherently conservative, but you also see things like scientific progress slowing down, things that make everyone's lives better. At the end of the day, opposition benches need to deal with the practical impacts, things like science slowing down that religion has done. That's the biggest impact in this debate, and that's why we've won.
Okay, I think that speaker for his speech now to continue the case for Team 12, House Organizers Cole.
Are we good to start? We hear from the second speaker's side proposition that religion merely constitutes a way of rationalizing your individual's way of life. But I think what we've told you on first opposition in this debate is that systems of religion and religious communities that are formed as a consequence of specific forms of belief actually represent much more than that. They are not just a code by which the way in which you live your life, but they ultimately constitute everything that you do in your life, every single person that you see. We think that that's something that's incredibly important and a kind of community that you cannot foster in the absence of having those shared beliefs. I want to do a few things in this speech. First, I want to refute every single argument that we get coming out of the affirmative bench, particularly their argumentation about conflict, which I don't actually think they did very much legwork on. They merely said that religion fosters conflict, but didn't actually substantiate that assertion. Then I want to rebuild a lot of Sarah's argumentation and show you why the only way in which you can allay this kind of corrosive existential threat is through having religious communities and religious intermediaries. So let's start with refutation. The first thing that we hear out of Sam is that religion is a good thing because it helps allay natural existential dread that individuals have. And I asked in a POI, Mr. Speaker, how are you actually going to allay those fears at the point at which you are merely teaching yourself the Bible? We got no very compelling response to that. The point is, Mr. Speaker, in having a meaningful sense of religious community, it is not only that you hold a particular set of beliefs, but it is also that those around you within a church or within a mosque also hold those beliefs. By virtue of being there, you validate your own belief system and actually feel more comfortable in believing. We think that that's something that's incredibly important at the point at which you think that harboring these religious beliefs is actually something that's important to ensuring that these individuals can live a meaningful and fulfilling life. We then hear from Sam that conflict is driven by religion because there is an in-group and an out-group mentality. A few things. First, we actually think that many religious doctrines stress loving individuals irrespective of whether or not they conform to your specific religious ideology. One of the tenets of the Bible, love thy neighbor. But what we would also say on our side of the house is that they didn't actually provide any substantive examples of this religious conflict occurring. At the point at which we can prove to you that ethnic conflict is likely to be a motivating factor for these types of things, or that merely trying to get quick money grabs could also be a motivating factor, I think that we've done a sufficient job in addressing that type of argumentation. The only response that we hear in any meaningful sense is that it actually makes conflict worse because people are willing to blow themselves up, something that they wouldn't be able to do in the absence of organized religion. But that has nothing to do with organized religion, Mr. Speaker. That just has to do with following a specific interpretation of the Quran, irrespective of whether or not that religious structure also actually exists. So we necessarily reject that argument. No, thank you. We would also say that for every act of conflict or every act of violence that you could ostensibly attribute to any religious group, you can also look at an immense act of charity that occurred specifically as a result of that individual's religious belief. An act of charity that would not have occurred in the absence of them holding those beliefs and being part of a community that has the ability to mobilize resources to help other people because that is in line with the tenets that they believe in. No, thank you. So we then hear from Sam this notion of absolute truth within religious communities, and the notion that it just perpetuates the authority of these individuals. First, I think it's very problematic that they assume an absence of agency in every single circumstance, that people don't have the ability to choose what religion they can actually take upon themselves later in life. But also, even at the point at which an individual is coerced from a young age into joining a particular religious community, at least under our side of the house, they have the ability to discuss the tenets of that religion, as opposed to their side, where what you are effectively saying is that the parent has the unilateral ability to coerce that child absent any other check on that coercion by the rest of the community. We actually think that that's something important on our side of the house. The other thing that we would say is that there are many instances in which actually fostering discourse within religions has led to other kinds of religions. That's why you have differences between Orthodox and Reformed Judaism, because people do actually disagree about the tenets of those religions within a specific context and can actually form other communities as a consequence of that. Sure.
So humans are biologically hardwired to believe irrational things because life is scary and they don't want to die, right? Like, you don't need a hierarchy in order to be provided with the benefits in terms of existential dread that you've staked all of your offense in this round.
We have not staked all of our offense on that in this round. I think that's a glib dismissal of our case. But what we would say is that the only way that you can have certainty that you are allaying that existential dread is actually through having a meaningful sense of community, something that you jettison on your side of the house.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Yes, you may still believe things irrationally, but you will not actually have the sense of community and the conviction in that belief that you have in the event that you actually persisted in maintaining a form of religious community. We heard this notion about how this harmed scientific discovery. Like, what we would say on our side of the house is that this is a moot point, given that you still have people affiliating with religions on their side, but more importantly, at the point at which people actually want to express these views within the public, we think that religious organizations act as an important conduit through which they can actually express their views in the public sphere. We think on their side of the house that you actually preclude those individuals from exercising their agency in that way. We think that that's problematic. We then get this final argument that's just absurd. Like, if you accept organized religion, you're more likely to live under authoritarian regimes. Patently untrue, Mr. Speaker, especially at the point at which these religious structures often offer a counterbalance to the oppressive regime that they wanted to talk about. Utterly absurd. What does Sarah tell you in her speech? She gives you one very... No, thanks. She gives you a very good argument about communities, and she tells you that having someone preach these specific views actually fosters community. What we hear in response from Mike is that you should have the ability to choose your own religion and have the ability to make an autonomous decision. But note that they have never engaged with the very obvious comparative in this debate, where you still have very overt forms of parental coercion occurring on their side of the house. So we don't actually think that that falls on their side. They tell you that this is merely an echo chamber. When we posit to you that dissent exists within these communities, that's how you get splinter groups. They also say, we would also point out that a lot of their actual argumentation is premised on a false assumption. Because note that many pieces of religious scripture actually dictate that you should have some form of hierarchical discussion occurring, that an individual should actually be the one leading that particular discussion. So we think that in the absence of having an organized religious community, you actually preclude individuals from accessing that. We also provided you a very compelling argument about the fact that you cannot just give yourself confession, you cannot absolve yourself of your own sins. The fact that these institutions do actually serve to allay individuals' fears in an existential threat. We also heard from their side that in a world without organized religion, these networks will not disappear. We're not asserting that all community networks will disappear, Mr. Speaker. What we are saying, however, is that you are far more likely to foster very close and intimate bonds with your neighbors at the point at which you share a very specific form of beliefs. What we have demonstrated to you is that this is the only way in which individuals can compellingly allay their existential fears. Fostering these communities is undeniably beneficial, and we're incredibly proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's speaker for his speech. Now to open the case for team 13, House Recognizes Daniel.
Mr. Speaker, from opening government, what we heard was that the specific harm of religious leaders in positions of authority was the fact that they could manipulate their positions to abuse people and to enact some sort of real harm in the world, whether to people who are marginalized, whether to rival groups and stuff like that. What we're going to be bringing you from closing government is the fact that when you have these positions of authority, they create a chilling effect on rival views and rival opinions. And we're going to be arguing that a world without organized religion is fundamentally preferable because of a free market of ideas that allows for meaningful engagement and interaction between people, which is going to develop greater discourse, greater meaningful engagement with religion, which actually will allow people on the ground to gain greater value and meaning from religion, and that you actually get more tolerance out of it. And then the other thing that I'm going to be doing in terms of the sort of analysis that Cole said that opening government didn't provide about how meaningful conflict is actually created with organized religion, and how when you remove that situation through a dilution of extremism because of the fact that people aren't able to meaningfully influence each other through value structures, you don't have the space for people to manipulate and damage. But the first thing that I'd like to say, just very quickly in terms of response to Cole saying that, basically we just heard pieces of examples of conflict and stuff, and of religion creating conflict. I mean, the first thing that you have to point out, Mr. Speaker, is that the fundamental issue in the Middle East right now is a contestation between Sunni and Shia Islam, something which principally came out not of Quranic distinctions of interpretation, but out of a differentiation in terms of choice of who were the positions of authority when the direct lineage of Muhammad ran out. The entire reason why the Middle Eastern conflict cannot be solved right now is because there was a fight over differing positions of authority within two lines of organized religion. This has got nothing to do with the Quran. This has got nothing to do with anything like that. It's specifically as a result of organized religion creating differences between people that then causes people to create value judgments about others and to fight with them about it, because Shia Muslims see Sunni Muslims as equal infidels to Christians or to Buddhists or to Jews. That's the direct and really, really obvious conflict that organized religion necessarily creates. And that principally comes out of the fact that when organized religion allows a space for people to influence other people's belief and value judgment systems, it creates the sort of power that you can then meaningfully use to impact and hurt other people's lives meaningfully. In a world where you have no organized religion, people can have extremist and mean and terrible views, but their ability to meaningfully influence other people to act in accordance with them is limited. And what that then does is it limits the ability of large groups of people to oppress and systematically hurt and subjugate other groups of people. That's the comparison that we had had in this debate. And we think that it's quite frankly reprehensible from opening opposition to come with all of this great stuff about community values and then glibly just, assert that organized religion has never done anything terrible like the Crusades or like the Middle Eastern situation. I'm sorry, but that's an absurd response. The other thing that I'd like to say in terms of response to opening opposition is that yes, they said that community values are great and they help people, but they never showed a reason why you need a position of authority for these community values to be garnered. And I'll take you in a second now. What you have to acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, is that you don't need a priest in a religious context unless Catholicism has prescribed the need for a priest to have some sort of religious experience for different people on equal levels of power dynamics in a society to support each other. Socialism may not work as an economic principle, but it certainly works as a social and a communitarian principle. We had no analysis to show why we need positions of authority, ma'am.
To have community units that all say subscribe to things like Catholicism or Christianity, whatever kind, etc., then you need to necessarily identify to a specific set of beliefs as determined by some level of authority in the same community. How else would you have any kind of religious community absent organization?
Okay, so I'm going to discuss that right now. But that is the exact way up that this debate asks for, right? It's about how meaningfully one-on-one interactions can happen in a world without organized religion. That's just begging the question of the debate. Cool. So now I'm going to go on to my points of extension. And the first thing I'm going to talk about is the free market of ideas, right? And we say from closing government that the reason why a world absent of organized religion is specifically more valuable is because it allows people and indeed forces people to engage with religious texts and religious ideologies either independently or one-on-one with other people or with small groups of people. What this does is it allows people to, and indeed forces people to more meaningfully engage with what they're learning and with what they're reading about. Suddenly you don't have to glibly accept Christianity as a whole for something that someone in a position of authority believes it to be, but you can instead mold it and craft it in a way which is more meaningful for you in terms of your identity and your religious beliefs. Suddenly, you have people who don't have to make a false dichotomy decision about either being a Christian and being homophobic or being able to consider gay rights and actually have to opt out of their religion. And when you actually allow that space, which organized religion fundamentally doesn't allow, of individual subjective interpretation and discourse, what you allow is people to create and to garner greater value from religion on an individual level because they're not being subjected to the views of religion from some sort of position of authority. Another readily available example, and I'll take in a second, is the idea of the fact that in terms of traditional organized religion, it's very difficult to conceptualize of a feminist Jew. In a world without organized religion, that's a meaningful consideration. Closing.
Don't you think free markets of ideas or free markets of anything work better when organizations are competing with each other?
No, I don't think so. I think individuals competing is best in terms of equality and free markets of ideas inside. I think as soon as you have positions of power, that naturally chills and subverts other positions. I don't support what you suggest. Cool. So the second thing in terms of extension that I bring before the House is an idea of tolerance, right? And what we would say is that a world without organized religion is far more likely to create tolerance amongst individuals because of the equality between people in terms of ideas, right? Because most of opening opposition's analysis has been contingent on the fact that the religions that they have been using as examples preach love and preach consideration of other people, but that is certainly not a necessity. And what we say is that when your only conception of engaging with religion and spirituality is on an individual basis between people, you are more likely, firstly, to interpret religious texts and to consider the value of opinion of other people. You are less likely to follow scripture dogmatically in a way that then causes you to exclude or disregard the opinions of others. So tolerance is more likely under our world, the world of side government, and you're more likely to concede to the views and value of what other people believe because there's no dominant position of authority that you can just either rail against or opt out of as opposed to just being oppressed by. So Mr. Speaker, fundamentally what we offer you from side closing government is a free market of ideas which creates more tolerance, more engagement in discourse, and a more meaningful religion for people on the ground. And yes, religion creates conflict. Proud to propose.
Okay, I thank that speaker for his speech, and now to open the case for Team 3, the House recognises Sophie.
what's been missing in this debate is a comparative between what would exist if organized religion didn't. Because people's basic fundamental need for superstition, for irrational beliefs to define the world around them and to make sense of them, would continue to exist as was conceded by opening government in a point of information. Given that scenario, our case is the comparative, where organized religion moderates discourse, moderates the atrocities that would otherwise occur both historically and in the present age. That's where we extend. So let me get straight down to it. Rebuttal will largely be integrated, right? So where from does religion stem, right? It stems basically from two places. One is that you need to create your own world conceptions. That's a basic human need. You need to be able to make sense of things you see around yourself, natural phenomena, conceptions of life and death, things like concepts that A, deeply affect you, B, you can't explain independent of some religious text or some external explanation which isn't really normal, because you aren't born with the knowledge of what happens after death, ergo you need an explanation. Second reason why you need it is because, religious or otherwise, you need some organization to define your life, because it's impossible to exist in a state of nature where everyone is in constant conflict with each other, where there is absolutely no overarching structure, state structure or otherwise, that defines our lives. You simply cannot fight every single day with your neighbor for your food, for your water, for resources, etc. You need some kind of organizational structure. We argue in closing opposition, organized religion historically has provided a significantly better structure than those that existed previously, right? For at least 4 reasons. And this is the comparative in this debate, right? Firstly, states are modern. The modern nation state is a largely modern concept. It did not really exist in historical times. That people really lived in atomized tribes with no real power structure. Secondly, even in today's world, the accessibility of the modern state is hugely restricted. We think large parts of Africa, India, and South Asia are largely exist independent of any state accessibility, because the state infrastructure simply does not exist. In that scenario, other forms of dogma, other forms of power structures, other forms of hegemonies will grow up, right? So there's the comparative. Would you rather have organized religion, or would you rather have an individual strongman's mandate that runs through a simple village, or pagan superstitions which lead to things like female genital mutilation, something that's not allowed by most forms of organized religion, etc., etc. Why is organized religion better? For at least 3 reasons. Firstly, it unifies ethnicities, right? The first recorded genocide in human history is the genocide of the Neanderthals. That had absolutely nothing to do with religion. The fact that humans exist in conflict for resources, etc., means that conflict is inevitable. Religion did not create conflict. It was one form of human conflict which was a lot less bad than conflict that existed previously. Why is that? Because ethnic differences, etc., are far more visible. You can see the others as others because of physical differences, because of proximity in the same geographical area while fighting for resources. Organized religion created a narrative that everyone was a child of God and therefore should be immune to violence. Yes, we agree not all religions are covered. Yes, we agree there are conflicts between Muslims and Jews, but that's far, far better than every single community living in conflict with every single neighboring community, which is the way the world used to function before organized religion came into existence. That deals with the entire opening government case. Secondly, we think what they also say is the alternative to ethnic strife is individual strongman mandate within villages, right? You require somebody's writ to rule an individual village, an individual community, right? Because you need someone to have some conception of a justice system, some conception of a retribution mechanism, and evolutionarily, it's the strongest of the group that usually becomes the leader. Why is that worse than organized religion? Because an individual is far more arbitrary than the Pope. For instance, when he has to moderate over time and eventually accept that homosexuality might be a good thing, right? An individual has no such incentive to do so because he's not running a popularity contest. He will be de facto leader for the simple reason that he happens to be the strongest and there's no one to unseat him. Sit down. Thirdly, we say patriarchy, as closing government and opening government pointed out, would have been significantly worse had organized religion never existed. Patriarchy exists because human beings are self-interested assholes who would never give up a position of privilege. Men happen to be biologically privileged in terms of strength and have forever been able to subjugate women. It's a hateful situation, it's a regrettable situation, one that would have been significantly worse if organized religion did not exist. Why is that? Because gender roles as created before organized religion were significantly worse for the simple reason that it makes sense for men who can impose their writ using their physical strength to keep their women at home, to keep them as baby factories in a situation where healthcare, etc. did not exist, because it then becomes possible for them to remain safe in their homes and produce the next generation, right? this is something that was changed by modern religion to an extent, right? We agree that modern religion, like organized religion, has significant harms that it confers on women. Except it sets a lower bar on what those harms can be. The comparative is between tribes in Africa, in Ghana, which practice female genital mutilation with absolutely no accountability because they can, because that's how they want to treat their women, as opposed to a broad organized religion which is fighting in a political sphere for power. Which brings me to why organized religion leads to moderation, right? Actually, I think
so female genital mutilation is caused because elders say to younger people, if you don't do this to your daughters, they will be sinners. That is a form of organized religion, and it's what we are opposed to on proposition.
Yes, that is not a form of organized religion. That's a form of hierarchy which would exist independent of religion. Organized religion makes it better because the Pope can't defend it because he needs political power, which brings me to the next part of my extension, right? Why does politicization, which is the basic tenet of organized religion, essentially lead to moderation, right? Politicization means that you require vote banks. Why do you need that? Because you want political power to be able to create policies that make the world around you resemble more like in line with your ideals. What this means is you need to cater to the lowest common denominator, the most acceptable, palatable form of religion, which will stand because you want political power. The Sydney Archdiocese, for example, started ordaining women when the conservative religious leaders started running for religion. Same way in India, where the BJP is now about to win the national elections, they have gone for a significantly less right-wing approach to Hindutva. Their best case example, the Tea Party, is a good one for us, for the simple reason that when religious crazies run for politics, it makes the other religious people realize that this isn't a defendable position. It leads to fragmentation of religion over time, with the moderates pulling more towards the center, as happened with Protestants, right? It's not like free market of discourse, as like a term loosely thrown around by CG, is the only way to have discourse. The Protestants broke away from the Catholics as well, right? So for all of these reasons, we believe accountability is significantly more when organized religion runs a popularity contest to proselytize more people, to gain political power. All of the harms they talk about would have been significantly worse both historically and currently. For all of these reasons, we oppose.
Okay, I think that's speaker for his speech, and that's going to be the case for Team 13. The House recognises
So we've just heard that religions are tending towards modernization and embracing more liberal tendencies, in embracing different cultures, different types of people. That is endemic of a society which is moving away from the dogmatism of religion, a society which tends towards being against organized religion. It's endemic of a society that we would prefer, one in which those religions were eradicated, and the way moderating force is social interaction, that where we're absent of the chilling effect, where we allow a free market of ideals, no engagement to Dan's extension. And the situation that they create, one in which political parties are moving away from religion, people are more tolerant, is one exactly which we are trying to craft through individual interaction. So what we tell you is let's directly respond to their extension, which is that the nature of religion creates a framework to protect people because they're all crazy. So the first thing is we say that the natural progression is that states will exist. Instead of religion being the dominating binding force in ancient times, we think that the progression of societies would be to congregate together for convenience. So form some sort of community, shared resources, protect one another. The second response is we say that the nature of religion itself tends against social harm. So they tell us that people need religion in order to restrict themselves from being horrible to one another, from murdering one another, from being immoral. We think that those conceptions are created when those things cause harm in the first place. The taboo is instigated that forms part of the religion. The process is not that religion prevents people from doing bad things, it's that bad things and doing immoral things are subsumed into those religions to protect people. That's the progression that would still exist, because we'd still believe that these actions are intolerable, and we think even in the absence of religion, we can prevent against that. Thirdly, we think all they do is that religion uses that moral high ground to justify oppression, to justify quashing alternative viewpoints, harming people. Let's attack their two examples. Firstly, they tell us that in Ghana we're seeing a progress towards more modernization. We think that in Ghana being more homophobic gives your church a greater denomination in order of public buying. and that the nature of female genital mutilation is from the specific position of authority that we would tend against. We'd say that, looking at their extension, they categorize religion as being a preventative effect, to withhold people's desires. So I think it actively harms that. It actively creates a metric of desire that can be imposed upon other people that we would seek to break. We dealt with that extension. Let's look at opening opposition, where they tell us two things. Firstly, that we need a sense of community that can be only garnered from religion. The nature of humans and our social interaction is one in which we would opt for a form of community in the absence of this form of community. So whether it's we band around a sports team, or whether we band around being nice to one another because we want to be nice to one another, we think that the nature of human socialization is to tend towards any sense of community formed by some form of identity. We don't see why religion is the exclusive source of this. Secondly, it is an exclusionary source of this because it limits those social interactions to people who share the same religion as you. So you're more charitable with people of the same religion. You're less likely to engage with people of alternative religions. So even their sense of community, if they believe it was so valuable, is limited. We don't see why the community is exclusive. The second thing they tell us is parents can influence children. We say there are three types of parents, and the bigoted parents they're talking about who would influence their children this way would just opt for a bigoted church or a bigoted aspect of that religion in order to teach their children. So in a situation where these parents are so horrible and would like to breed intolerant children, the state gives them the opportunity to do that by just opting for a horrible church or a horrible form of that religion, which is more extremist. What we're opting for under our model is a more to target tolerant parents. So parents who perhaps want to teach their children that gay rights is alright, but they're socially persecuted for having a divergent view from that religion. We give a greater opportunity for more liberal parents to enact upon that under our model because they're less likely to be tied by the social expectations created by the religion itself. Now,
if your extension is that you get more tolerant and more diverse beliefs from engaging in conversations with lots of different people, how do these conversations occur without the infrastructure of community, and how do you get any benefits of community if you don't have people largely subscribing to at least the same sort of beliefs?
So we believe that people largely subscribe to things like being part of a country, being part of a particular city, supporting the same sports team. We think that there are multiple aspects of community. Secondly, we think that interaction can take place between individuals and small groups, and I'll look at that under my extension of development of tolerance. So, right, no thank you. So we think that we've given you the mechanism of the comparative, the nature of the dual chilling effect that people with authority can occur. Yes, echoed by opening government, but with the comparative of a free market of engagement. We tell you that in the situation where people who have divergent viewpoints can interact with one another in a small group communication. So you meeting someone on your campus, you speaking to your parents, saying about what the nature of God is, what we ought to believe. At the funerals, at weddings, wherever you interact with people in a social environment is an opportunity for the engagement that we tell you that can take place. We think that a formalized structure limits this potential of this discourse because it creates a basis upon which discourse is no longer tolerable. So there are certain binding aspects to religion which are immutable, and the majority Christian demographics, one of these are that we don't like gay people because they're unnatural. It's that these immutable characteristics are less likely to engage in discourse than under our model because they're linked intrinsically to the identity of the religion that differentiates itself with that society. We don't have that snag in discourse under our model. We don't have the fundamental binding principle that dilutes that. So we tell you that tolerance is more likely because people can engage on these taboo issues. People can make these value judgments. They tell us that people are less likely to make founded beliefs about God. We tell you that the reason that so many people have existential crises, even though they're religious, are because they've never had the ability to meaningfully reflect upon what the religion means for them and the nature of that religion in a personal level. That's why currently even the most staunch Christians on their deathbed will have significant doubts. Maybe it's the human condition, but we think it's the absence of the discourse that we provide you from opposing government. We think that that's insufficient even in that sense because it's a form of belief that compromises your ability in society in order to engage with others. We think that's worse. The last thing that Dan tells you is the dilution effect. It's the mechanism of how we can never, or less likely, band together to impose harm upon other people within society. It's because you no longer have the immutable characteristic to prevent you from turning on yourself when you say, those are Muslims, we are Christians, we must persecute them. We have that diluting effect of never being able to band together to inflict your bigotry upon others, and we think that's significant. We create more tolerance, we create peace, and we protect people by offering them belief systems. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the speaker for his speech, and now to conclude the debate for Team 3, the House recognises Bucky.
Mr. Speaker, not once in their 4 speeches have they told us why the absence of organized religion necessarily implies the absence of organized dogma. Not once in their 4 speeches have they told us why the absence of organized religion means the absence of just religion in general and superstition that exists in an atomized and fragmented way and can be much more pernicious, right? No response to most of Sauradeep's analysis from Yash. I'm going to thematize this debate in 2 ways, right? Is the absence of religion the absence of organized dogma, and 2 is the absence of organized religion the absence of religion and superstition in an atomized fashion, right? So on to my first clash about the comparison between religion and dogma, whether religion has a monopoly over dogma, or whether if organized religion didn't exist, all of us would be average reasonable debaters, right? Sarah speaks in her first speech about how nationalism would be the only other identity, and here's the thing, right? We've seen nationalism in cases like Stalin's Russia, Mao's China, and that weird Armenian government that had that extremely militant atheist guy being extremely dogmatic, right? And we think this sort of organized dogma is more enforceable than religion, especially when the definition of a nationality or a nation state is the ability to have violent monopoly over coercive force, right? We think free market fundamentalism is a kind of dogma. They just haven't compared what would happen in a world without organized religion. They've just come here and done a Christopher Hitchens sort of bitching session, which is enjoyable but not suitable for this debate, right? OG talks about how religion allows you to bridge ideology and actions. We think other forms of dogma, like nationalistic dogma, as alluded to by opening opposition, can bridge this gap much better, right? And here's the thing on violence and conflict, right? Cole told you about how there's a counterbalance, religion provides a counterbalance to forms of violence and forms of conflict and otherization created between human beings, right? He didn't tell you how Sauradeep did. Sauradeep told you that, look, religion can divide, but religion can also unify. So at best, without opening or closing government, giving us a comparative, this issue cuts both ways, right? In the same way that I can say that, I'm going to kill this person because I am a Christian and they are a Muslim, the religion, like my Christianity, can prevent me from killing the other person because I am brown and that person might be white or black, right? If we're both of the same religion. So we think in a pre-religious world would have a collective action problem, which is a form of market failure in Dan's words, right? Because things like ethnicity, things like language, things like gender even tend to divide people and create perverse incentives for them to behave in different ways. Religion can unify them. We don't think just genocide and conflict and violence are either A, the monopoly of religion, or B, made much worse by religion. We think it's at best for government bench a zero-sum game, right? Moving on to my next clash. Is the absence of organized religion, the absence of just general dogma and superstition and just all the crap they've been speaking about. And there are 3 issues that I want to talk about. Firstly, on how politicization leads to moderation and accountability, right? Here's the comparison. Presently, there are tribes in Ghana that commit female genital mutilation. You can't do anything to these tribes because they are not organized. You can't reach out to them. They don't have a hierarchy. They don't have a leader who you can hold accountable. At the point at which, a Muslim organization that is supposed to represent all Indian Muslims or all Indonesian Muslims is promoting female genital mutilation, you can hold them accountable within your political discourse. And that's exactly how, for example, most Islamic organizations in our country stop the practice of FGM. We see that as true of several sorts of Jewish organizations that have stopped circumcising people as well. But here's the thing, right? We gave you the analysis about how the Pope, because he's running a popularity contest, right, has to liberate and moderate himself, as opposed to you sitting in your basement and having your father or your mother tell you what's right and what's wrong, right? This free market of ideas has swung very badly against against closing opposition, right? And no, next issue is like the issue of choice, right? And this is all of Sorodip's like atomization of strongmen and atomization of dogma analysis that heard no response from Yash, right? Here's the thing. Different religions are evangelical and ergo try to court different people and provide them with a choice. Ever since landing in America, so many people have approached me and said, "Sir, do you have a minute to talk about Jesus Christ?" I really didn't give a shit, but if I wanted to, I would have been exposed to that choice as opposed to sitting in my basement or sitting in my tribe, having my father mutilate my genitals and tell me that it's good for me, right? But here's the thing, while you can choose from Islam, Christianity and Judaism when you have organized religion, Mr. Speaker, organized religion also lets you choose from Lutheranism, Methodistism, or whatever the Seventh-day Adventism, I don't know. It's all bullshit as far as I'm concerned. I don't know why I'm on op bench for this motion, right? Sit. No. So moving on, right? And here's the thing, Dan's whole free market of ideas cuts really badly for closing government, especially when in the Indian free market of ideas, like organized Islam and Christianity was able to liberate people and emancipate them from the horrendously dogmatic caste system, right? Like that was an atomization of a tribal sort of structure that existed. I'll take opening.
Please explain how the specific events of the Crusades, the Inquisition, or the imprisonment of Galileo Galilei would have happened without an organized, centralized, resource-bearing religion.
Yeah, they would have happened because it would have been some organized, centralized, resource-bearing other form of dogma in the same way that Stalin committed like a genocide in his country. Dan, I'll take you now if you want.
Okay, so please respond to the extension which says from closing government that because you cannot influence people so easily without organized religion, the sort of homophobia that exists in the Ugandan church would not exist under our world.
Yeah, because you can't influence people in the absence of organized religion, you can't influence them to do lots of good things that religion does. In the presence of organization, you can hold them accountable to sort of liberate and modernize, right, and do the right sorts of things and allow religion to be affected by things like secular ethics, things like politics and stuff. But on social benefits of religion, this went largely unresponded, right? Opening opposition told you how religion allows you to create a community. And here's the thing, when organized religion try to spread their own religious views, missionaries tend to feed people, give them medical aid and proselytize them when these people have been abandoned by the state and left to die. Fiona, ignore what we said in the previous debate, right? Sometimes only religion can give you the hope when all your rationality gives you no hope. After the Rwandan genocide, people had no reason to live when their families had been destroyed, when their limbs had been cut. Only when religion gave them the hope, it gave them the security and the feeling of community that they needed to live, could they do that. We are proud to oppose.